Everybody, welcome back. This is the video for lesson 33, chapter 12 of Toliver's Secret. It's the second to last lesson in video of the entire book, so we're getting close to the end. I'm excited to talk about it. Hopefully these videos have been helpful, and now that you're becoming a little bit more familiar with them, still make sure you're listening through the whole thing, and but using it in the best way possible, that you're able to do as much work on your own, and do as much thinking on your own, just using me as a support, like you would in class. I know you don't have your other classmates to discuss, but when we have our Zoom meetings on Mondays and Fridays, we can discuss certain things if we're still confused, or just push our thinking so that you're doing more of the thinking, and you're just using me as an explanation to check afterwards. So the objective today is similar to lesson 30, almost exactly the same. So the objectives are the same, but we're going to approach it in much the same way. So let's dive right in. So again, reading lesson 33, we're looking at pages 143 to 156. Our objective will be, we are determining the theme of a story. And like we've talked about before, the reason why we're doing this is because these are why we read stories, especially fiction stories. The stories are made up to show a truth about the world or about our life, so that we can better improve ourselves or improve the world around us, make the world more like the world we want to see, not the world that is. And this is what brings us to stories over and over again. So I watch movies, listen to songs. All these things have themes in it that connect to our lives and the people that we want to be. We're talking about it again so soon, is because you'll notice today that I think this chapter shows a couple of different themes that weren't mentioned in chapter, I believe it was 9 or 10 the last time we did a theme lesson. And so I put this here, that texts often have more than one theme, and sometimes those themes work together. And so I think there's the lessons that we're going to drive toward today are going to be different. The themes are going to be different than our last lesson, but we can still use the same strategy to help us find those different themes. And you'll see, hopefully, that these themes actually work together and improve each other a little bit more strongly when you find more of them. Great. Before we dive into the lesson, as always, let's take a look. Oh, before we even do vocabulary, so our end goal today, at the end, we'll be able to write a theme, describe a theme, and we're going to make sure that we include key details from the text that helped you notice the theme. So we're taking direct evidence from the text to prove a certain theme. And as always, I think there's quite a few good themes that you can pull from here. And I'll be talking mostly about one, possibly two or three. But when you are making your own, if you find a strong theme and you prove it with evidence from the text and you can explain it, then that's great, as long as it's well supported and not just made up out of nowhere. Awesome. So here we go with our vocabulary, as always. The first word is pewter, which is a metal made from tin, copper, and other metals. It looks like silver. You might see pewter spoons in your grandparents' or great-grandparents' collection. We don't really use it that often anymore, but it's usually what cups and things were made like back in the Revolutionary era, because it was a cheap metal to make that lasted a long time. The second word is lustily, which means very strongly and vigorously. In this chapter, the word lustily is used for how Mrs. Shannon waves her flag and how she sings, and so it just means she's doing it with a lot of energy, all of her strength behind it. Yeah. The third word is endure. That means to bear up under or function in spite of, to outlast. I think of a marathon, a running race. The goal is not to run really, really fast the whole time. It's to just hang on, to just keep going. And so that's what endure means, to just keep going, to buckle down, to not give up over long periods of time or long struggles. The fourth word is beckon, to signal to come using a motion of the head or hands. If you can still see my video screen, going like this means you're beckoning someone anytime you show something with your hands to try to get someone to do something. And then the last word is disbelief, a condition of being unable or unwilling to believe. When you've got just one last person to outlive in Fortnite, and then you are sniped from nowhere, and you thought you were going to win, but you ended up getting second, you might be filled with a feeling of disbelief. How did that happen? Why me? But yeah, disbelief is just not believing something that's happening. And I'm sorry if that was patronizing to make a Fortnite joke. All right. To get your minds on what we're thinking about today, which will connect to our theme in a small way, someone actually discovers Ellen through her disguise. As you read, find that Mrs. Shannon, because Ellen bowed, like the young ladies were taught to back at that time, so he curtsied instead of what a boy would do, which I think is saluting or bowing. She found out that Ellen was in fact a girl. And so just curious about a time when you tried to fool someone but failed. So take a minute now, pause the video. Now that you're back, again, you can share your stories. I'm looking forward to reading them. One time when I tried to fool someone, a friend of mine, back when we were probably in 7th or 8th grade, we were about 14 or 15, we wanted to go see a movie at a small movie theater, but it was a rated R movie. And so we went and bought tickets for a PG-13 movie that we were allowed to see, but then snuck into the theater to try to, the other theater that was showing the R movie, just so that we can watch it. Unfortunately, it was a very small movie theater, and no one else had bought tickets for that movie. So as we were sitting huddled in the corner of the theater, about 10 minutes after the movie was supposed to start, a attending came down and said, "What are you guys doing here? There's no movie playing." We were like, "What? We bought tickets." Said, "No one bought tickets to this movie. It's not showing." And so we felt pretty stupid that we had failed to fool the movie theater. So that was was pretty embarrassing. We felt pretty dumb. So that's my story. I'm sure you guys have more fun and more interesting ones. Just connecting to what we're talking about today. Sometimes you try to fool someone, it doesn't work. Things aren't always what they believe, or what they seem to be. And so then diving back into our actual lesson, we're going to determine the theme of a story, and we're going to very quickly just relook over some of the same information that we looked over a couple lessons ago to remind ourselves what theme is, some basics of theme, and then we'll focus on how we're going to find that theme a little bit differently than last time. So here we go. When we're inferring the theme, we can use something again called the seed to theme strategy. Okay, that's a big one that we talked about last time, and we'll review it again today to keep it in our brain. So big word that you need to know is theme, which we know is a deeper lesson or truth about life that everyone can use all the time to improve their life. Right. Some common themes. We've seen these before, most of them the same as last time, but I added one. Hard work pays off. We can accomplish more when we work together. Doing the right thing often requires sacrifice, that we learned from Harriet Tubman. The more you do something hard, the easier that thing becomes, from Love That Dog. If you believe in yourself, you can accomplish anything, from Hatchet. And the one that we found in Lesson 30, sometimes we have to overcome our fears to serve a bigger cause. And that was something that Ellen learned, and that we learned from her. In chapter 30. And Mr. Holmes, you might be like, Mr. Holmes, why are we seeing these common themes? We did this last time, this is stupid, why do we have to go over it again? You'll find that the more books you read, the more you see the same themes over and over and over and over again. The reason why is these are truths about life, and there's a couple key truths about life that are really, really helpful. And the more you read books, what makes books interesting is the different ways that they show these themes. But the more familiar you are with these common themes, the more likely you are to spot them, spot these truths in the books that you're reading, and also start to internalize them and use them for your own life and having a happier and better life. And so that's why we go over these common themes, even though we do it last time too. Now, the actual strategy, seed to theme, just reminding, we usually start with a really big idea or topic for our seed, and then grow it like a tree up into the themes. That is a lesson that everyone can use. Some of these topics are just very, very big ideas of things like truth, freedom, justice, kindness growing up, and a bunch of others. The last one we said fear was an idea that we faced. And we're really going to focus on this part today. How do we find these things? How do we find these big ideas or these little seeds that we can grow into? And we're going to look for repeated patterns of problems in text. So we're going to look to see problems that occur, or at least situations that occur in this chapter that also occurred in other chapters. And also topics or ideas that are brought up often in a text. This is going to be the big one. We're going to, same like I said before, in this chapter, there's going to be situations that were brought up in other chapters as well that are very similar. And so you'll be able to see that if the author is bringing this up over and over again, it's probably one of the big ideas that they're trying to show us a theme about. Okay? And then growing our whatever idea that we find into full themes that people can use. Okay? We did this one out of freedom. And then how do we do this? We're going to be focusing on this one as well. So really, number 2 here, noticing ideas that are brought up often, and then any one of these is how we grow this idea. What does the character learn about themselves, the world? How does the character solve their problem or not solve the problem? What character traits does the character show? And how does the character's perspective or beliefs change? We're actually really going to be focusing on this first one. What does the character learn about themselves or about the world? Because if we can answer that, combined with the topic, that's going to give us a theme that helps us grow and learn what the author was trying to show us in this chapter. So keeping that in your mind, let's dive into the questions, which are directly connected to that. Now, I'm going to give you a heads up now. This 4th question doesn't directly connect to the theme that we might be pointing to, but it could if you're trying to show a different theme. So as we're going through this, or if you're going through on your own, don't be put off if this one is confusing you a little bit, but we'll talk about it when we get there. So, connected directly to the strategy here, what topics or ideas that are brought up often? That's our first question. What situations in this chapter repeat situations from other chapters? And what are the important topics? Okay. So take a little while right now, go back into the text, pause the video, and find situations that are happening in this chapter that have happened in other chapters as well. And what topics do those things connect to? Okay. Now that you're back, I'm going to show you what I found. And again, there's a lot of repeating patterns here from other chapters, but these are some ones I found. You may have found some others. And let's start by looking at page 145. I will switch over to the camera mic, or the camera screen, whatever it is. Here we go. Here, I think a couple things. Okay, I'm going to kind of go not necessarily in order that they appear, but kind of in the order that I'm thinking of them. And so there's a bunch of evidence for something like this. When Ellen first sees Mrs. Shannon, she's this part right here. A small British flag was stuck jauntily in her white apron. Okay, and then down here, the woman started singing in a loud voice as she wiped her hands on the towel at her waist. And so she's at this tavern. There's many, many redcoats at the whole thing, and this Mrs. Shannon has a British flag in her hair, showing that she supports the British. But if she was married to Mr. Shannon, who's a patriot, that wouldn't make a ton of sense. And we find out later, on page 153, I believe. Nope, 155. I think this actually shows it the best. All day long, I pretend I'm a loyal subject of the king, out there in the tavern singing away like a bird in a cage. Okay? And so when Ellen first meets Mrs. Shannon, she seems to be a loyalist. She's with the British, but we actually find out that she's a patriot. And so similarly with the British soldiers that Ellen first met, Dow was not a nice man, but Higgins was. She thought all these British soldiers were evil jerks. She finds out they're not always what they seem to be. And so they kind of are disguised. So I think we see this topic repeated of being disguised, or that that people aren't always exactly what they look like, appear to be. Okay. A few times too, right in the beginning, something else that repeats is that she doesn't trust Mrs. Shannon at first. Right back at the evidence again. Is this Mrs. Shannon? Ellen whispered. So she doesn't even know if this is Mr. Shannon to start with. So she doesn't trust her right away. Same thing she did with Mr. Murdoch. She didn't really trust him right away. And then going on here to page 147, even after she has met Mr. Shannon, she says, "Give the bread to no one but Mr. Shannon." So very similar to past chapters, she's making the choice to not trust Mrs. Shannon, just like she didn't trust Mrs. Murdoch or even herself at the very beginning. So it takes a little while for her to develop some trust. And then one last thing I think that's repeating too, if you look on page 153, on the bottom, Mr. Shannon says, "Lucky it was that my horse threw a shoe when I started out to look for your grandfather. I got to thinking about you there in the smithy and decided I'd better come back to see if you'd stop there." Okay. Throughout this whole book, Ellen works really hard and doesn't give up. And because of that, she puts herself into some situations where she actually gets a good bit of luck. She never would have made it to Elizabethtown on time without Mr. Murdoch just happening to be riding his horse back. So she got lucky that he was willing to give her a ride. And same thing here. She got lucky again with Mr. Shannon not just leaving right there or noticing her at the smithy. And so I think we see this repeated pattern of luck taking place throughout the book. And so the three topics that we came up with were luck, trust, and possibly disguise. And so let's explain what we saw. So like before, characters are appearing to be different than who they actually are. Mistress Shannon appears to be a loyalist, but is actually a patriot. And so I'm just going to put the topic that it connects to is disguise. Ellen doesn't trust Mistress Shannon right away. And doesn't want to reveal herself to her. Because she's not sure if it's safe. So that gives us the topic of trust. And then lastly, Mr. Shannon decided to come back to the tavern because he had noticed Ellen at the smithy. The only reason he was at the smithy is because his horse had thrown a shoe. And throwing a shoe doesn't mean the horse picked the horseshoe up and threw it. It means that the shoe had come off the horse's foot. The little U-looking object that goes on the bottom. Throwing a shoe. It was lucky that they even met. Cool. So that topic of luck. Now, again, if you're thinking, Mr. Van Holtz, why did we go through this? Well, these are our themes. This is our ideas. Our big ideas are seeds that we might be growing into a theme. Something about disguising yourself or trust or luck. And those are our big ideas or topics that we can now start to ask ourselves the questions. What did Ellen learn about themselves or the world? And how does that connect to these things to grow into a full theme? Okay, so let's think about it. What does Ellen learn in this chapter? We can talk about what she learned about herself. Excuse me. Though we'll get to that down here, number 4. Or you can just talk about what she learned about from the world as a whole. So take a moment right now, pause the video, and when you come back, we'll discuss. Great. I think she learns a lot. So she had this image in her mind of what Mr. and Mrs. Shannon would look like or be like, and when she meets them, they're actually not like that at all. So she learns that Mr. and Mrs. Shannon aren't what they aren't what she expected them to be. So Ellen learns that Mr. and Mistress Shannon aren't exactly like she expected them to be. I think she also learns, so again, let's connect farther down here. But she learns, too, that when she finishes the job, it feels really, really good. And I want to point this evidence in case you decide to use it later. It's on page number 152. I'm going to go back to my straight camera view for a second. Right here, middle of the page, she said she had delivered grandfather's message. In spite of everything, she delivered the message. Her face was beaming. All right. So that means that she did it, and when she did it, it felt really good. Her face was beaming. She could not help but smile. All that effort, all that work was worth it. And so it seems like she learned that accomplishing a hard goal feels really good. Ugh. And I think she also learned too, the Shannons are really surprised by all the difficulties that she encountered and how she overcame them. And so I think lastly she learns that she's stronger than she thinks she is. She learns that even through all the challenges, she could do it because she didn't give up. And so before, when she thought she was very weak and not capable of things, I think she learns the opposite, that she is actually very capable. So I think lastly, she learns that she is stronger than she thinks that she is. Okay. And so I think, again, directly connected, this question number 3, what messages beyond the text do you notice in the chapter? This is asking for the theme. What is a theme that goes beyond just this book, a theme that can be used for everyone's whole life? So to give you a little bit of guidance, it directly connects to what she learns. It's something that she learns that we can also learn as well. So take a minute now, do your best to think about it, come up with a theme, and then check back in a moment. Awesome. Now that you're back, she learns, again, 2 of these things that she learns. Mr. and Mrs. Shannon aren't exactly like she expected them to be, and that she is stronger than she thinks she is. She learns that things and people aren't always what they appear to be, or that looks can be deceiving. She looks like a small, frail young girl who's not capable of much, but really she is a strong, independent young lady who can do anything she puts her mind to. So I think a message that she gets here is that we can learn is that looks can be deceiving. And since we see it repeated, and that kind of really connects to our topic up here of disguise, to be deceiving, and since this is a lesson that everyone can use, this might actually be the theme that we use. Okay. She also learns here that she learned that accomplishing a hard goal feels really good. She learns that, and when we've experienced this in our lives, we also have that feeling as well. When we do something that's really challenging, a test that we didn't, that we worked really hard for, we read a lot of books so that we were ready to go, a difficult dance move, or just other small goals that you had that you worked really hard for after a long time and then you accomplished them, it feels really, really good. So I think that's a message that we can take beyond the text, that working hard and achieving a hard goal can feel really good. Great. And so, these are lessons that everyone can use all the time and truths about life. So these can happen to be our theme. I think, again, there's a bunch of others that we can draw from this. One I'll just mention briefly. We saw a bunch of luck coming into play. So you might want to you can come up with a lesson of that. When people work hard, they create their own luck, or that people need luck to succeed. Those be lessons that we could take from this as well if you want to try to connect from luck. Same thing with trust. She wasn't able to accomplish her goal, and she actually had to trust Mr. and Mrs. Shannon. When Mr. Shannon took her into the back room, she could have said, like, no, I don't trust you, I'm not going in there. But she had to trust someone else in order to accomplish her goal. And so even though we see that she doesn't trust her right away, eventually she has to accomplish her goal. So we could take the lesson away that sometimes you have to trust someone you don't fully know to accomplish something big, which is something that we've talked about before. I think all of those ideas would be fine themes, so I'm bringing them up now, but they're not the themes that I'm driving toward, so I'm not going to speak much more about them. Okay. And now this last question, I'm actually going to skip over it because I think I put it on here to be more of a guide if you were struggling with what does she learn. I think we can focus on just not what she learns in general, but what she learns about herself, which is one of the things that we talk about in our seed to theme strategy. You can get a theme by something a character learns about themselves. And she did. She learned that she was stronger than she thought, and so that connects to our theme of looks can be deceiving. It also connects to the last one of working hard and achieving a hard goal. So that's why that one's there, but feel free to skip over it. Great. Now we just need to write what the theme actually is, and then back it up with details from the text. And so right now, take the time to start and begin and work on this on your own. Try your best to complete it without any help. But when you're finished, check back in to see if your thinking is along the right lines, and you've also met the criteria of how to include details that make the most sense. So, go ahead and pause the video. And now that you're back, let's do it. Again, I'm going to focus on one theme, but if your theme was different, as long as you do the things that we do here, you're going to be fine. So, as always, full sentence, indent. The theme of chapter 12, or I'm not going to write the theme, I'm going to write a theme, because there's many. A theme of chapter 12 of, and again, Toliver's Secret is a book, so it should be underlined, is, and I'm going to put this in quotes, don't always have to do it, but sometimes I'm going to put things in quotes, looks can be deceiving. And that's one of the ones that we came up with, put right here. Okay. And then we get some details. I'm going to give one and then explain, and then another one and explain it too. Again, you can do it where you give 2 pieces of details and then explain both of them and show what they both show. As long as you're including those details and explaining them, you're fine. Because, and we're going to use it right from the text, on page, I'm going to flip back on my own, and I'll show you where it is. It's on page 155, zoom right into the camera at the top. And then I'm going to copy exactly from the text. Page 155, quote, Mistress Shannon says, all day long, I pretend I'm a loyal subject of the king. And then there's some other words that I don't really want to use that go there, so I'm going to put that, but then pick up a little bit later on and says, and you pretend you're a boy with nothing but a loaf of bread in your kerchief. Great, so that's the exact evidence from the text. Notice that it's in quotes. I said which page it was from. Now I'm going to explain. This shows that both Ellen and Mr. Shannon, it's a name, so I capitalize it, disguise themselves to accomplish their goals. Since the redcoats, how do I want to say this? Since the redcoats believe them to be incapable of doing important things, they are able to use their looks to deceive the enemy and accomplish great things. You can explain that any way that makes sense to you, but that's how it makes sense to me. Looks can be deceiving because people didn't believe, or they think they look a certain way, they think certain things about them. They both Ellen and Mr. Shannon can get away with things because it's not believed that they can be any help. Okay. Another piece of evidence that I can use, and there's so many, but I'm going to use something I actually haven't talked about yet, maybe. Yeah, I'm going to use that. Haven't talked about it yet, but I'll point out the evidence because this is just another example of looks being deceiving. This is on page 148 and 149. This is when Mr. Shannon first reveals himself to Ellen as Mr. Shannon. Ellen says he liked his face now that she could see it clearly. And then she talks about his eyes and said they had seemed to bore through her jacket in the blacksmith shop, but now they were smiling. Okay. And so when she met Mr. Shannon in the blacksmith shop, he was very mysterious and she couldn't see all of him. So he seemed like a kind of a scary, maybe even evil guy. But now that she sees him for who he really is, he seems quite friendly. And so that, again, continues to show us that looks can be deceiving. Additionally, on pages 148 and 149, the text says, Ellen liked his face now that she could see it clearly. And again, there's a couple words I don't want to use, so I put 3 periods. Had seemed to bore right through. Trying to type with the book not flipping is challenging. Her jacket in the blacksmith shop. But now they were smiling. This shows that in the smithy, Mr. Shannon appeared to be mysterious and kind of scary. Really, he was friendly and encouraging to Ellen, and even happy about their meeting. And then just in conclusion, this shows that the theme looks can be deceiving is in chapter 12. Excellent. So, again, your theme could have been very different. As long as you have details from the text specifically, you quote them, and then you explain what those details show, your work should be fantastic. Last 2 closing thoughts, just to wrap the whole thing up and connect it to our bigger ideas. How do disguises help characters in Chapter 12 fight for freedom? It's pretty simple. Both Ellen, being disguised as a boy, allows her to go through the enemy lines and return to the tavern, and Mr. and Mrs. Shannon, disguised as loyalists, shows that they can, or makes the British trust them so that they can then sneak information past them through them. Yeah. And then we talked about fooling others in activation. What more do we learn about fooling others? I think there's a lot to learn from this. I think one of the best ways to fool over is to just, a lot of people have biases. They already think certain things about certain groups of people. A lot of the soldiers back then probably thought that women were not capable of doing hard things. And so Mrs. Shannon kind of leaned into that. She was like, yeah, don't mind me, I'm just here singing, when actually she was doing some really sneaky stuff for them. So I think we learned that fooling others, we can kind of lean into their biases, their beliefs that they already have about the world, and have a better chance of fooling them. So try not to use that to your own advantage unless you have to. Try to be honest with things, but that's a different conversation. Cool. So, as always, I hope that video was helpful to get through the lesson, to understand the different ideas that were coming up in the book, and that you now have gotten better at finding, identifying, and explaining themes. We've got one last lesson that's connected to Toliver Secret, lesson 34. It's the next lesson. And again, I hope these videos are helpful, and if you have any suggestions, comments, or questions, feel free to post them on Google Classroom or to bring them up at our Zoom meetings. Stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.